Which, of course, brings us to our next speaker, and that is Beth Nakamura. Beth is an Emmy Award-winning visual journalist and multimedia specialist at the Oregonian in Portland, Oregon. And her work has been recognized by the American Photography Society of Professional Journalists, National Headliner. She's received the National Headliner Awards, Pictures of the Year International, National Black Journalists Association, and many, many others. Beth has been on the faculty of the Missouri Photo Workshop and is an adjunct instructor at the University of Oregon Multimedia Journalism Graduate Program in Portland. And sometimes she writes. Welcome, Beth, to the show.
Thank you. Hello from rainy Portland. Nice
Absolutely.
to see you, Rich.
It is, yeah, nice to see you as well. It is fantastic to have you on.
Thank you.
The work, of course, that has gotten you not just here, but where you are in career is really important to talk about, and your pathway here is really important to talk about. So I wonder if we kind of get started.
Let's do it.
So let's do it. So how did you get into this? So we are looking at an image. Ooh, hang on a second. Let's see if we can go.
We'll find that. We're going
to find it. There it is. There's the image.
There it is.
So this is the Nashua River.
This is the Nashua River.
You had a sidestep into journalism. Go ahead, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. We talked about when we were planning on my role in this conference, and about just kind of going over how my process of maturing and developing in the work. And so I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a survey here, and I decided to actually go way back to my roots. And so this image, and sorry for the quality, I just yanked it off the internet. It's one of the only that exists, I think, of the Nashua River as it existed when I was growing up in a town in central Massachusetts that was, kind of part of the industrial section of the state. So this river flowed through the town where I grew up, and you can see it was a factory town. It was industrial. It's hard to imagine that now, but at the time it was all factories, plastic factories, and most of the folks in the town worked there, and that supported them to raise families. But this is what the river looked like when I was growing up. It changed color every day depending on what the factories dumped into it. And so that sort of sets the scene for my own upbringing. I was raised by my mother for the most part. My parents split when I was young, and my mother raised us primarily. It was a very big, messy, unwieldy, and beautiful clan of many siblings and aunts and cousins, and a kind of a tribe, really. And I think I say all that to say two things. One, I think what took root here, both in growing up and as I made my way into the bigger world and saw myself in relation to the bigger world sort of for the first time, was this kind of strong sense, or this sort of unarticulated and nagging question of what justice was, or I guess injustice. My mother was a waitress. She did that her whole life, up until a couple of years before she died, when I was 30. And when I was a kid, she used to take me in like single digits, 9 or 10 or something, and I'd go and help her bus the tables. And it was really, these are rich memories for me. The waitresses would all throw me a few bucks at the end of the shift, and plot me at the bar with a Shirley Temple, and it was like the most exciting thing in the world. So I think I had this sense when I was a kid, early on, that work was exciting and empowering even, and perhaps even a ticket for me. So those things all took root early on, and I want to address the students here. I know there are a lot of students today and who will look at this, and photographers younger, trying to sort of figure out who they are in this work. And so I offer these up as a kind of to consider for yourselves, the things that shaped you, and use those as a guide for both the work, the kind of work you want to do, and the kind of places you want to do it for. I think that the seeds of what define you can be found in these ancient places, I would say. So also, I hope this signals some reassurance to people out there, that I went to neither Columbia University nor the great school in Columbia, Missouri. My background is pretty atypical, I would say, which both helped me in the sense that I wasn't really run through, like a typical J school filter of sort of this is what it looks like, and also hampered me. It was a long and circuitous route to finding my way. Um, Finally, and I know we're lingering for a while on this image, but these are important years. I'm sharing this at the outset, and it exposes me, and it makes me, vulnerable, really, to share those more intimate things. But I do this as a way, to try to form connection with everyone here beyond these screens that we're all just so trapped behind now and for the foreseeable future. I'm also demonstrating, just how connection forms and how empathy potentially develops. I think those are qualities that are inherent in all the good work that we do. And this connectivity is at the root of impact and how impact happens and the change that can result from that impact. So, it's a neurochemical process, and it's very powerful.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you pointed out the word vulnerability. Um, uh, Vulnerability is something that we ask people to do when we're photographing them
Right.
all the time. But if we're not vulnerable, and this goes a little bit against a lot of the be a fly on the wall kind of thing. But if we're not vulnerable, I think this is what you're trying to point out, that if you personally are not vulnerable, the person you're photographing won't reciprocate. I'm also
Yeah,
hearing
I
that if
think
you're
there's
not,
got to be
yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's got to be some glue there. I mean, people aren't really, I'm not there to, no one really wants to hear my story, but I think there needs to be some authentic glue, and a recognition that we are in a shared and very human experience. And out of that, comes trust. And out of that, some good work will arise. But without that,
Hmm.
it's possible, but it's just maybe not my style. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think for people, also for students, I didn't plan on talking about this, but I will say I know that, I tell my students when I teach that your social skills are some of your more important skills, and that muscle will get worked over
Hmm.
time and get warmer, and that kind of freaks a lot of people out. And I would say to the shyer ones and more introverted, which I think is actually many of us, that one of your most important skills in this is actually listening, but and really listening. And I think there's so much power in that. And if there's anything to work and that we're sort of short of in the world, it's that. So I guess that's one
Yeah.
of the most important tools in my kit, frankly.
Right.
So I went on to work at the Virginian Pilot. Before I did that, I spent I would say, sort of grueling years at my hometown paper. This is an image that I made at the Pilot. It's, believe it or not, that's a World War I veteran, and I went to his little apartment to make a picture of him for Veterans Day, and he kicked out his great grandchild, who kept kind of clamoring to get back in, and so it made for this delightful little moment. But before I went there, I sort of feel like I'm that OG granddad in this talk today. I've been doing this a long time, uh, but before I went to the Pilot, I spent some time at my hometown paper, and it was there and earlier in New York City where I discovered photography, really, and then later there at that paper where my connection to photography was born. It was difficult. It was, I'd do 8, 9 grip and grins or check passings, and really, it was like that kind of stuff that I was doing all day. But it was during that phase of my life that I began to explore photography myself, because developmentally, at that age, late teens, early 20s, that's kind of a key developmental phase, but also photography, and my relationship to it. And those things were sort of born in that phase. It was a low point, like I said, but low points can be your friend. I lived a kind of monastic existence during that time, but I strengthened my voice through improving my photography, and my voice up to then had been pretty weak, given all things. But that I ended up producing kind of yeah, I guess I was sort of like a visual diary in a way, kind of a photographic record of just my life, and more a personal, I guess, over that time. It's never been published. I don't think it ever will be. But that work, nothing that I had done for publication, but that work is sorry, uh, what landed me at the Virginian Pilot, where I had 10 really delightful years. I would say that work. I also want to bring up, there was a person who played a key role. If you don't know her, you should. Her name is Michelle McDonald. She's a really extraordinary woman. It was through the National Press Photographers Association and at a women's conference where I met her, and that really changed my life. And profoundly. And it was then that I ended up at the Virginian Pilot, where I had just a delightful time with Bob Lynn, who was legend, and justifiably, rightly so. He's got that reputation, and he hired me, and I worked with, gosh, 28, 30 photographers. That's hard to imagine now, but that's what it was. And it was there where I really started to really kind of work on mastery with just the craft of photography. Um, the people that I worked with were spectacular. At that time, that was a well known as a training ground for some of the greats. And I with their support and frankly their love, they were just a really fantastic group of people. It was mostly men, but I'm happy to report, there was none of that Me Too shenanigans. These were just really impeccable people who supported me and cheered me on and taught me everything. And it was there I started to really up my game in terms of crafting imagery, and then in terms of storytelling. And it was a few frames ago, I think there's a story that I did, and these are just selections. I'm not showing whole
Hmm.
stories in this sequence here, but it's sort of little glimpses of some of the stories that I did. And I would do kind of essayistic things, where just kind of exploring kind of sequencing and that sort of thing. And then, with this image that's up right now, that was a story, for trying to figure out narrative storytelling. This was an example of, that can be practiced in one night. So this woman, number 16 here, she made her living doing these contests that were sort of in all the bars along the strips in Virginia Beach, and she used that money to put her daughter through preschool. So this was an election night. It happened every Tuesday at the bar, and she would slap on a number and go around the room and try to get everyone to vote for her. And she was quite good at it, actually. And so that was an example of going from more essayistic and kind of exploratory, sort of all about crafting and that sort of thing, to trying to tell sort of a more complete story, say even in
Hmm.
as this is an example of just one night.
Yeah. So a little bit ago, there's something that you mentioned, Beth. That you said the low points can be your friend, and it brings home to me this idea that you're pointing out, that the tough spots can be our biggest growth points. And not only that, but it looks like, I mean, these pictures are 20 something years old, right? It's like, sorry, they're
30,
about
30.
right. Sorry, it's from 30 old. So like, sorry to have a little fun
I'm
there,
aging
but
myself
the
here, but yeah, these are 30 years old.
right, but and these are teeth cutting images. These are growth
Right.
images. Yes. And so I'm hearing
Absolutely.
this idea that you can continue to grow as you start to work professionally. That no one is this perfectly rounded person when we get started. Am I hearing that right?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, when I was sort of trying to structure this talk, it was clear that at every developmental phase of both my life and my career, there was something that occupied my mind and my heart as I toiled in this work. And there are themes to it. Early on, it was sort of discovering myself and discovering photography, and then
Mhm.
at the pilot, it was really sort of trying to master photography. So here's the story that I did. And so I would do these little essays and these little sort of, complete and sort of small narratives where we
Mhm.
impose a kind of beginning, middle, end, just to sort of trying to understand, this idea of narrative arc. And so then later I did this story. There's just a few examples from it, which was of a young girl just following her through her final year of high school, and the sort of ways that we mark that significant year. She was a very bright girl. I think she was the salutatorian of her class. She lived in really rural section of Virginia, and she lived with her mom and her two sisters. And her mother was a worked full time during the day at a meat packing plant, and at night worked at 7-Eleven. So Trina and the whole family really kind of shouldered a lot. It was really a remarkable story, and just a glimpse into her life. Nothing fancy here, but it was lengthy, and it was kind of like my first foray into something that was just like a little more long form. So
Yeah. And it's got this theme. The last couple of things have this theme to them that it exploring really strong independent women who have to go it alone.
yeah, oh,
Am I
that's
hearing that?
interesting. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, you're mirroring that back to me, and it didn't occur to me actually. But yeah,
Hmm.
I suppose that's true. I guess it's sort of it's like that Eudora Welty, write what you know. I was sort of,
Yeah.
I think when you're more connected thematically, uh, it'll show in the work maybe. So here
Hmm.
in this picture is, there's nothing, it's unremarkable, but to me this is an important image with Trina, even though it was decades ago, because she was trying to get a full ride scholarship at a school in Northern Virginia, and she had to meet with a really kind of fancy like board of the school and the scholarship, and like you can't really get more upper echelon kind of situation. And they allowed me in the room as they conducted this interview with her. They allowed me in for about 30 seconds. I shot this one image. It was a really tiny room, and then I left the room. And I really was grateful that they did that, but also, to see what she was really up against there. And I'm happy to say she did get the scholarship, uh, and then went on
Hmm.
to college, which is where our connection ended. But I've always wanted to follow up on her, actually.
Yeah. So after this, so this rounds out, I believe, some the work that you were doing in Virginia and on to Oregon. Am I
Right.
right on
And
this?
so,
Okay.
yep, yep. So from there, I won't get into. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I actually got out of journalism for a few years. I didn't. It was just because I wanted to. I had a family, and so I have two uh, uh, beautiful boys, now 16 and 20, which is just staggering to consider. But I took a few years off in there between these jobs, and had my kids, and actually had my second when I was getting into the Oregonian, where I worked part time. And then when I had my second, I really sort of wanted to. I was so overwhelmed. I wanted to quit. It was just sort of that white flag of surrender with two small kids. That anyone out there who has been in that situation understands what I'm talking about. And I'll always be grateful to Patty Rexton, who was the director of photography at that time, who said, "Please don't quit." She had two grown boys and sort of knew what my future was, even though I couldn't glimpse it. And she said, "But what can we do?" And I said, "Well, I'll work one day a week." I mean, I was so overwhelmed, and so that's what I did for a long time. Would seem unheard of now, but they accommodated me. I did that, and then eventually, we were sort of, as was everyone in the industry, having to endure the sort of rocky road of disruption, recession, all kinds of things that were happening. So I was part-time for a long time, and then ironically, in the midst of the worst of that, I ended up going full-time, which is
Yeah.
what I've been doing ever since. So during those years, it's kind of, and many of you could probably relate if you're a workaday person. It was sort of like the news industry itself was kind of having a painful like reckoning, I guess, where it's sort of like, who are we and how do we fix this broken model? And to a large extent, that's still going on, but at the time, it was just so it was a real crisis of identity and survival. And so I just kind of put my head down and did what needed to be done. We you know I, because of the limits of my schedule and what was happening in the industry, I just kind of photographed you
Mhm.
know uh, whatever they needed me to do. It was galleries and proms and food. Food was easy because I could put it down at the end of the day. Here we have because it's Portland, they have an annual sex ball. This was the S&M corner, so there I am, just kind of doing doing uh, what needed to be done. Uh, you know, out of this though is very important. I would two things. I always try to find the humanity or something that would make it meaningful and to me. And so, for example, with these prompts, there's a lot of ways that I could have looked at that, but I chose to look at it as if I had a front row seat. A middle-aged person has a front row seat to this incredible rite of passage with these adolescents that I would never otherwise have access to. So to me, it was just like really, really fun. And, I just tried to approach everything as positively as I could. I think that out of these, relatively sort of dark years came some really good things. Again, Rich, like, we were talking about the dirt
Mhm.
and, the dark time, the need to be adaptive was at the forefront of all of us working. And so I learned video. I'd always been a
Mhm.
big fan the documentary form. So that was cool. I began to write. I had written earlier in my life and, always liked writing. I don't want to say enjoy it. It's difficult, but I
Mhm.
like it. It's very satisfying to me. So it became more expansive, as the industry, the big banners, the erosion of trust of those sort of big institutional banners started to lessen. We as individuals, we too didn't have that sort of gatekeeper in our way. And so we could be more expansive, both in the things that we
Yeah.
wanted to pursue, the skills we wanted to learn, and the ways in which we wanted to put ourselves out there in the world on social feeds and et cetera. So, to me, it was, you know, I don't want to be Pollyanna about those years, but also a lot came out of that for me, and I will say I think what ultimately happened was a return, I think, to the things that really distinguish us in this industry. Compared to everything else that's out there on this infinite internet, and how we do that, as it turns out, is through quality. And so, yay,
Yeah.
right?
Actually, I'm gonna scroll back just a moment. That's right.
Okay.
It's through photography, but I'm gonna scroll back just a couple of images, and point something out. There's a in some of the things that I'm seeing through the work that you're showing with us
Hmm.
is is first of all, we mentioned, and just not to go too far back in what you're talking about, you
Yeah.
mentioned learning, being invited to apply for the job at the pilot by Bob Lynn, of all people, by Bob Lynn.
Yeah. I
So here's
know.
this amazing editor saying, do this, and this is something that we listen to. You don't say no to that guy,
Right.
it's like saying no to Mike Smith. It's like, no, you just don't do that.
Right.
So you listened to him, you followed it, and there you are at the pilot. Not only are you learning from him, but you're learning from everybody there. And it
Absolutely.
showed in the images, right? It showed in the images. And so now here you are. Matter of fact, to roll back just a couple quick, and I'll go forward again. Um,
Hmm.
now here you are at the Oregonian, surrounded by people like Jamie Francis and Pam
Right.
Royal and the other folks that and um, and these images, I mean, I can see and a Jamie Francis influence in this image.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Here's this like round, and am I wrong in seeing that you're kind of like not just being, and I'm going to start rolling forward again, but not just being this person who does what needs to be done, but who learns as she goes and is finding
Absolutely.
new things to look at, and especially in an image like this where it's not just a prom. There's so much more information in here in just
Right.
this one detail, you know. And what year is this? This is 12, 13.
Oh, maybe something like that. Maybe 2015. Maybe some 2015.
Okay,
Something
right.
like
And
that.
so there's so much more information just in this one detail,
Right. And I think,
that transcends the prom. Go ahead.
right. And I think, and so at the pilot, I was really focused on becoming the best sort of craftsman, that I could, and absorbing and learning from everyone there. And I think, yeah, I'm always, I'll say that about myself. I'm always in sort of learning mode, I'm always motivated and interested. I think that I kind of have a natural curiosity and a kind of excitement, that started early for me. And I think, when you're covering things, and I'll get to the protests, which is sort of, in some ways this, the elephant in the room here. I will get to that, but I think, when you're shooting proms weekend after weekend or year after year, gosh, I did it probably 4 or 5 years. It's like you have to go beyond that sort of first pass. So, your images start to get a little more interesting because you're sort of done shooting the expected ones. So I think that's a benefit to when you're working with the same subject matter over and over.
Yeah.
And so, I would find things to do. Become like, I became more attuned to just sort of the rhythms of the internet and the interests of the people. And I would use that and do things that, were kind of fun for me. And, this is hard work. So, to pick sort of fish in a barrel as I did during the dress rehearsal of the Nutcracker here one night, that's fun. That's a way to just, easy night and
Yeah.
doing things that I knew would please. I knew that would interest readers, but that was also fun for me.
Right. So here you are exploring your own ideas, just getting in there, having some fun, but also if it's like you said, if it's fun for you, it's going to be fun for readers. But you also
Right, right,
expanded and you started doing some other things. So you
right,
started to get into documentary video work. Of
right.
course, the very first thing, right? The very first thing that we mentioned was, um, or that I mentioned when I was introducing, is this Emmy that you won. I mean, in newspapers, an Emmy, right? How
Yeah, yeah, a
outstanding is
couple of
that?
those. Yeah,
N-
it
and
was
not to
fun.
right, exactly, and not to harp on awards, right? Because with good work comes awards. So here's the idea. This is basically where this first video clip. We could kind of just present it, and then we can describe what happens, and what was going on, what led you to
Sounds
this
great.
story
Sounds
in
great.
just a
Yeah,
second.
and I think, yeah, where we are in this trajectory is now I'm pivoting to quality. I'm trying to pivoting to more long form stuff, and so that's where we are now.
Okay, so let's go ahead and watch this video.
I was
Great.
convinced early on that we were dealing with a serial killer.
He's always been a demon in my life, lurking in the back of my head.
There have been times people take people out, kill them, bury them. There's other times where they've taken them out and just thrown them on the ground after they got through.
She probably ran. He got his gun out.
What are the odds of being a prime suspect in all these murders?
Officials say they do not expect to find the girl alive.
His eyes would change color, and he says, I want to kill someone.
He knew that area. He worked for the highway department.
He was a hunter. And hunters doesn't necessarily restrict it to animals.
He knew that area pretty well, didn't he?
Like the back of his hand.
I know this road
back of my head. Same with the stations, only FM band. Farms and truck stops, fireworks stands. I know this road like the back of my head.
Look what happens. Look what happens. I hear I'm the only freaking survivor.
So mildly powerful. Okay, not
Okay.
mildly powerful. Really, really dang powerful. So what led you to that story? What led you to getting into documentary video and documentary video journalism?
Well, in those years prior to this, we were all learning all kinds of skills in that sort of, elusive, s- search for the secret sauce of how to make it all work. I mean, I think, out of all of the tools that suddenly became available to us, created in a way all these new and different forms. Documentary as a form is not new, but I think that the way we're practicing it, we're kind of moving it forward. There's some really tremendous work going on. So this I would say, I'm proud to say this has, I found out this morning, this 5-part video series has over 5 million views altogether. That's really remarkable. I think part of this is that the true crime genre is just explosive. But I think what's sets this apart. And we released this a few years ago, so it was at a time where this wasn't. This was sort of like the idea. Typically true crime, and this is a story about a bunch of women who were murdered, and at the center, the soul of the story is this woman, remarkable woman, Marlene Gabrielson, who is in Nubiak, grew up in Alaska, and was brutally raped by this man years before any of the killings took place. And she was disbelieved. She had a rape kit, she had credible evidence, but she was a trauma. She had a lot of trauma. So, what is typical, I think, in those cases is that there's inconsistencies. There were inconsistencies. Women were put, victims were on trial in those days. And so that was really tragically what happened to her, because I think had she been believed, this guy wouldn't have gone on to kill as he did. But what we did that was unique about this, we weren't really sure people were going to get it, but I kind of call this or we call it as a team, this is feminist true crime, because we really minimize the role of this guy, and we put it to the forefront and named each of the chapters, both in the written story and in the documentary series, after each of the women, and put their stories front and center in this series. So but we broke this news that these were serial killings that hadn't never been public before. It was things discussed among investigators, and we were able to make the case for that. I think looking at this work, it's the challenge was so now I'm bringing more sort of like the journalism to bear here, and the challenge though is that you're working in this big project that is about a bunch of people who died decades ago, and a few retired investigators and a bunch of deep woods, and it's like, how do you visualize this story? That was the challenge. So I'll give a few examples here, and I think early on it was clear that a kind of color palette emerged, like blues and greens, and so I made note of that and kind of stuck with that. And I made images that were sort of, I think, evocative of the sort of place and of the time. And we would go and visit the scenes where people's bodies were found and that sort of thing. So so the photographic skill that I had worked so hard on at the pilot really came to the fore in a project like this. And
So
as a
this leads
team,
to
we coalesced.
sorry,
Yeah, I mean,
as a team. Go ahead.
absolutely. So I worked with two of my dearest friends. They're both supremely talented. Noelle Crombie is just a terrific reporter, writer, human being. Dave Killen, all the same, just really fantastic video editing and video person and photographer. And, we have the three of us, when you're working together, as Carolyn talked about the longing for that, we each brought really distinct skills to this. We had some overlapping skills, of course, but we each brought something unique to it. And together we sort of coalesced and had some really good chemistry. So once we, we spent a couple of years on this one. This was a bear. But once we get out of that, we sort of pivoted right away to another story, which was about a young woman and her experience with a big humanitarian nonprofit that you all might know about. It's called Mercy Corps, and I think we have a trailer.
We do, and so we're gonna go ahead and show that right now, and then we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
She was very frightened of him. His presence in the world was very powerful.
I kind of felt things weren't right there, but I never imagined that they were as bad as they were.
When I saw her last, I didn't know if she was going to make it. I mean, I really didn't know if she was going to survive.
There was abuse. Tanya reported many times. They just wanted to cover it up.
There is no good thing good enough to make up for the things he did to her.
So again, mildly powerful, yeah. It's what's really interesting is that, as Patrick just pointed out, Patrick Murphy Racy is one of our board members on the in Atlanta, is that you make it look easy, but it's not easy.
Yeah. No, it's really hard. It's never easy. I think if it's easy, that's when you have to quit, because that's when you're a hack. It's just never easy. This was a really challenging story. We were dealing with a young woman, Tanya, pictured here, whose father was one of the founders of Mercy Corps, a global humanitarian nonprofit. And she was telling us that he had sexually abused her entire life. She has no memory of a life before that. That's how young she was and what she alleged. She had, this story for me, as a photographer, I would say that was probably the least of what I did in this story. And I think photographically, it's not my strongest work, but I'm showing it because I think it's important work, and it shows, how other skills come into play when we're doing this kind of stuff, and especially where this level of sensitivity is involved. Excuse me. So, Tanya, when you're dealing with that kind of trauma, the relationship with the subject becomes really critical. And, I developed a very close one with her over a long period of time. She had a lot of evidence of her experiences. She was a voracious chronicler of her life from a very early age, and she didn't throw away a thing. So she had just literally dozens of cardboard boxes in her basement. And I sat with her for weeks, just looking at every single last scrap of paper, finding evidence of, writing about her experiences with sexual abuse, and referring to friends. We were able to corroborate it with several people. I'm proud of the work. It really has rocked that nonprofit and caused their own sort of internal reckoning and now transformation. The CEO stepped down with a few heads rolled as a result of that, but good will come of it in terms of how they basically threw her under the bus when she came to them about her experiences, and kept it quiet. And they work with vulnerable populations everywhere, including he also had. So and they're based in Portland. So this was a real, it rocked Portland for a while there. So, but
so I'm hearing this other message in here, Beth. Sorry to cut you off. This idea that good will come from it, but the idea also kind of stems from from this idea that we have to trust the readership, we have to trust the leadership in whatever power is in. We have to be able to let them make decisions just based on the information we're presenting them.
Right, but the stakes were very high here because this is a nonprofit that is respected, around the world, and we were alleging the most damning of accusations. So we needed to be right, and that was fragile. This woman is Michelle on the right, and that's Michelle and Tanya on the left there when they were kids. That was the age. So Michelle was an important person because we found out from her that she too had been sexually assaulted by Tanya's father, by the founder of Mercy Corps. And so we flew to California and had a conversation with her on video and for a written report. But the picture on the left shows you the age they were when that happened. So you can see they were children.
Yeah.
So tough stuff.
Absolutely tough stuff, but important. At the same time, is this also, remind me, is this part of the story as well, or are we moving back into other things?
We're moving on. So, we finished that story. It kind of turned the city and the humanitarian, the nonprofit world. It really rocked around the globe because, there had been Oxfam Me Too stuff going, Aid To, was a hashtag and, all kinds of stuff. So this had made quite an impact. And when we were finished, we really, at that point we were really a team. We were kind of becoming, developing a reputation for our work, and we worked so well together. Like I said, we're dear friends, and so we were kind of poking around and looking for what can we do next. And then the pandemic came.
Yeah,
like
and here's this Edward Hopper looking image too. It's like
right.
It's like, okay, so let's. I mean, and not saying that, it's just like, what are the things that the work that we do evokes for us, and it comes in, and you look at an image like this, and you're like, yeah, that's it. So here's pandemic, and you're doing this work that just has to be done. It's this daily work. It's like, what do we adapt in the pandemic, and not only that.
And so
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm interested what you think.
No, I say not only that, but we still have to do the daily work, and this is just something that I'm hearing from you is that it's got to be done, and we've got to put our nose down and just keep doing it, but keep producing images that are meaningful and interesting.
Right. And I think this is obviously probably one of the most historic years in our lifetime, certainly. So, we are called to a much bigger moment, and we of course need to respond. I think my struggle, and here we are. There's surges again in the virus, so I'm going to be pivoting back to this stuff, but it was a challenge. I think the lack of PPE certainly, and frankly, the kind of sanitizing hospital marketing campaigns that were happening. And I certainly wouldn't argue that heroes work there. I have a sister-in-law who worked in COVID at the peak of it in New York. I'm clanging my pots and pans with everyone else for the healthcare workers, but I think that had a harmful public health impact in terms of the way it sanitized. Victor did amazing work. Philip Montgomery, amazing work. There are people out there who have done incredible stuff, and I'm so grateful to them. And it's so important to show the impact of this. And, I was just, grasping for things to do and trying to render this moment as best I could when George Floyd was killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so
here we are. As you, I think you had pointed out to me before, here we are, and you're a conflict photographer in your hometown.
Right. And so that is what happened to me in the United States. Clearly, looking at the other talks, I'm not the only one, and it's sort of reassuring, but also dispiriting, to see this, among us all over the United States. But that didn't happen right away. certainly. It happened slowly. You know, I compare it to
Right.
sometimes being like a lobster in a pot. I could just sit there in the cold water and little by little. I guess I need a gas mask. And just like pretty soon you look like Robert Capa. I mean, it was bonkers. It didn't happen right away. But it was clear. It was clear to me, that we were in the midst of an uprising. That was clear right away. I think if Portland, what's happened in Portland can be broken down into three acts, and that Act One is really the uprising, and what that happened on the heels of the killing of George Floyd, and the release of that video made by a 17-year-old girl, by the way. Imagine that.
Yeah.
And so I just photographed that. It was raw. There was a lot of humanity. It was quite touching, actually. But there were also moments that were there was some unrest. There was rage, as other photographers have used that word, and I think that's appropriate. There were broken windows, and there was some looting, and there was some dark moments that came out of that rage. But it was largely peaceful. But the harsher stuff got the attention of the president, and so that's when he called federal law enforcement in there, and that's Act Two. And so that's some of what I'm showing here are that.
Right. And I want to leave just a couple of those images until after, because someone documented you documenting Portland, and I wonder if we can take a look at that clip.
Mm-hmm. That's the wildfires happened is what it is. In the midst of the pandemic and now months and months of protests, now suddenly there are these staggering wildfires that are just, suffocating much of the state. And so this little clip is about that.
Yep.
So, in the middle of this, against the backdrop of a global pandemic, with months and months of nightly protest, suddenly, in this sort of like biblical gesture, we became overwhelmed by forest fires. They started in California and just spread. And, entire little communities were just completely devastated. Journalists are really resilient people, but when the forest fires hit, it felt like a breaking point, and yet we have to respond. This is the work we signed on for. And I found out about an evacuation site that was behind a high school in Springfield, Oregon. And so I went. And in the field and on the track were these three superheroes. It was like a mirage.
I just think that people need to know that there's brighter days ahead and that we can get through this together if we try hard enough, and that to ask for help when needed. I think that's what we really need to work on. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes people just need somebody to talk to, some just need a hug. And it's been really cool because out of the time we've been here, a lot of adults and volunteers have stopped us, said hello, and wanted to take pictures. And I was kind of surprised that you never know who is a hero in their life. You never know who wants a picture, and it's just we had a lot of people just saying thanks to us and everything, and it meant a lot to us.
Yeah. We're so happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you.
So here we are, interwoven between pandemic, wildfires, protests, and it just kind of keeps happening.
Yeah.
I wonder in the 90 seconds or so that we have, in the very short time we have to wrap up, how do you keep yourself moving forward? How do you keep yourself to continuing to be able to make the work and make meaningful work every day?
I met with some college students earlier this week in a little Zoom meetup, and one of them asked me, with given everything that's been going on, and we're at 6 months of protests now, by the way, along with all this other stuff. Do you risk burnout, or how do you deal with burnout? And I was like, yeah, hard no on the burnout. I feel, and I confess to feeling that I confess to being fueled by anger somewhat over what's happened in our industry, the disruptions, and this sort of campaign against us, and how perilous and fragile it all is. I feel more dedicated than ever, given all that, um, and and I think our work has just never been more important. I want to say that to everyone who's listening. It's never been more important to expose injustice, hold powerful people accountable, shine a light in these dark spaces. And so I feel called to that. I certainly have felt tested. 2020 has tested me, as I imagine it has so many of us here, but I'm still standing. So.
Well, Beth, thank you very, very much for sharing your work and sharing more than your work, sharing yourself with us tonight. We all appreciate it. I know a lot of people learned from it, and a lot of people have actually found probably some refuge in it too.
Good. I'm glad.
Absolutely. And everybody, thank you very much. We'll take a short break and we'll pick back up. One more speaker, Meredith Kohut, will be back here with us, and we're going to look at her work, and then we'll find out some more about the stuff that she's been doing. Stand by.